His body sizzled against iron, the sound sharper than screams, because there were none. The fire licked him slowly, deliberately, as if savoring its meal. Skin split, flesh bubbled. The scent of holy meat filled the square, thick as incense, clinging to the robes of those who watched. But he did not beg, he did not curse, he did not cry. He waited, held in agony by chains, by faith, or by something deeper. And then, through cracked lips and blistered breath, he whispered not a plea but a punchline. "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." The crowd gasped. The guards froze. For in that moment, the fire no longer owned him. He had stolen. It transformed suffering into defiance, pain into poetry. This was no longer execution, it was performance. And he, the condemned, had become the playwright. They thought they were burning a body, but they were forging a symbol. A man so committed to his soul that even agony became absurdity, that a joke could be carved in the language of burning nerves and charring muscle. This was not bravery in the traditional sense. This was something stranger, something older. As if the bones knew that death, once embraced, could be mocked. And in mocking it, he transcended it. His name was Lawrence, a deacon, a steward of the poor, a servant of a crucified God. And Rome, in its hunger for control, had tried to silence him with fire. But fire does not silence, it spreads. So now we ask, across the ages, across the smoke and ash of empire and faith, what happens when death becomes theater, and the man meant to be the victim becomes the writer of its final line? Before the iron, before the fire, before his skin blackened beneath Roman flame, there was a man who walked among the poor with a softness that startled even the cruel. Lawrence of Rome, young, devout, unarmed, carried no sword, no title, no power but faith. He was chosen not for his strength but for his heart, made deacon by Pope Sixtus II, entrusted with the treasures of the early church. But the treasure, Lawrence believed, was not gold. It was suffering. It was service. It was the broken hands of widows clutching loaves of bread, the blind stumbling into cathedrals, the lepers resting beside sanctuary walls. And so, day after day, he fed them, clothed them, gave away what little the church owned, until the only thing left to give was himself. He moved through Rome like light cast in a dying empire, radiant and quiet. Even those who scorned his Christ could not deny the reverence he stirred. They called him holy, unbreakable. Some whispered that angels followed his steps, though Lawrence dismissed it with humility. What made him untouchable was not armor, it was intention. He believed in something larger than kings, deeper than empire. He believed that suffering, when carried with grace, could become a kind of power, a weapon without violence. A revolution without armies, but Rome, pagan, trembling, blood-stained, feared men like Lawrence more than any legion, because a man who cannot be bribed, broken, or bowed cannot be ruled. And so the emperor watched, waited. When the Pope was seized, beheaded in the street, Lawrence wept, but he did not run. He remained in the city like a ghost, refusing to leave the living. He gathered what little was left of the faithful. He burned with something purer than rebellion. Something that would soon become his sentence. What do you do with a man who holds no weapon, but makes tyrants tremble all the same? The demand came like thunder. Hand over the church's treasure. Rome was bleeding gold into wars, into idols, into decadence that could not feed its soul. The emperor wanted what Lawrence guarded. He wanted silver, relics, secrets. But Lawrence, ever obedient to a higher crown, said yes. He would bring Rome its treasure. And so he gathered them, the crippled, the blind, the orphaned. He lined them up before the throne of the empire, clothed in rags, eyes gleaming not with wealth, but with faith. Here, he said, are the true treasures of the church. The statement was not defiance, it was doctrine. But in a world ruled by ego and empire, truth spoken plainly is more dangerous than heresy. That moment sealed his fate. What Lawrence offered was not gold, it was a mirror, and Rome saw its own emptiness staring back. A kingdom of stone and steel undone by a boy in linen robes. It was not blasphemy, it was clarity. And clarity, when it mocks power, must be extinguished. The emperor didn't just want obedience, He wanted reverence. Lawrence had offered him none. No fear, no plea. Only beggars as saints and an empire exposed. He was arrested within hours, bound, isolated. The relics he protected were hidden away. The message he delivered could not be unheard. They tortured him, not to find gold, but to reclaim the illusion that authority was sacred. But Lawrence smiled through it, not with madness, with certainty. He had lived without fear. Now he would teach Rome how to die without it. Was this a martyr's courage, or a holy insult whispered so loudly it burned a hole through an empire's pride? They stripped him not just of cloth, but of status, of name, of breath. He who once served communion now lay in a Roman prison, wrists chafed by iron, ankles swollen, flesh purpled by beatings. They wanted more than his submission. They wanted his undoing. But Lawrence remained silent, even as the cell grew colder and the air thickened with rot. He did not recant, did not weep. He only prayed, softly, rhythmically, as if reminding the walls that no empire lasts forever. The guards grew impatient. The emperor grew cruel. Swords were too swift, beheadings too dignified. Rome needed something theatrical, something slow, and so they chose the Grate. A torture more ancient than Rome itself. An iron frame heated until it glowed, until fire kissed it into hunger. This was not a punishment, it was a performance. The church would be made to kneel not through silence but through spectacle, and Lawrence, its voice, would be roasted like an offering denied by heaven. The preparations were public, the message clear. Let all who serve this dead god see what becomes of defiance. The citizens of Rome, once indifferent to this soft-eyed deacon, now spoke his name in fearful awe. Some said he still smiled behind the prison bars. Others claimed his hands, though broken, still clasped in blessing. In the final hours, the fire was stoked. The Grate was readied, and Lawrence was led from his cell, not as a prisoner, but as a prophecy, bound for martyrdom, not by his choice, but by the shape of his soul, because what Rome feared most was not rebellion. It was faith that would not flinch. How do you destroy a man who welcomes agony like an altar, who walks into the flame not to escape death, but to reveal the rot behind? The throne? They laid him across the Grate like meat offered to gods long since dead. The metal hissed beneath his skin before his body even touched it. The fire was not roaring. It was precise, controlled, fed slowly to prolong the agony. His feet were the first to blister, then his calves, thighs, spine. The smell was immediate, unbearable. Flesh cooking, fat popping, hair shriveling into ash. His hands clenched, not from fear, but from pain so vast it twisted the air itself. And yet, no scream. The crowd watched with hollow eyes. What was this? A man, a saint, a fool? The heat should have broken him in moments, but minutes passed. And still his mouth did not open in agony, but in breath. The fire climbed, his ribs blackened, his lungs struggled to expand against the smoke curling from his own skin. But he remained conscious, as if endurance itself was a prayer. The guards turned him once, then again, not to grant mercy, but to roast him evenly, to complete the ritual. And with each turn, they saw what they could not unsee. A man whose body collapsed, but whose presence did not. His eyes glazed, but they did not close. His jaw trembled, but it did not plead. When his back began to fuse with the Grate, when the bones beneath him hissed in the rising heat, a sound escaped him, not a moan but a murmur, laughter, a joke too holy to understand. The death they had prepared, the slowest, most deliberate destruction Rome could offer, had failed. In its purpose, he was not reduced, he was revealed, not a man consumed but a soul laid bare. What burns first in a man, the body or the belief? And what if belief is the only part that fire cannot touch? The fire had done its work, but it had not silenced him. His flesh was ruined, blackened, cracked, sloughing from bone in ribbons. His limbs twitched, not from life, but from the nerves dying slowly, violently. He should have been unconscious. Instead, he lifted his head, just enough to speak. "Turn me over," he whispered, voice thin as smoke. "This side is done." A joke, a miracle, A final defiance not shouted, but smiled. The executioners froze. For how do you finish killing someone who has already claimed the ending? The crowd, once bloodthirsty, stood paralyzed, not by pity but by awe. This was no longer death. This was poetry, written in blisters and breath, and then silence. Not the soft, peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that follows a moment, too enormous to comprehend. His eyes closed. His body did not convulse or cry or beg. It settled, like coals beneath ash. No martyr's speech, no final gasp, only stillness. They waited, for collapse, for shriek, for soul. But there was only smoke, curling upward, carrying not just scent, but story. He had turned death inside out, taken Rome's most grotesque invention and made it sacred. His body was destroyed, but his legend was already breathing without it. And so, beneath a Roman sky and the stench of cooked holiness, a saint was born, not in defiance of death, but in full cooperation with it. He welcomed the agony, and in doing so made it powerless. What if the truest freedom isn't escape but endurance, when a man roasts slowly into legend and leaves behind only silence that speaks louder than flame? They carried what remained of him away, not as a body but as an aftershock. The grate still smoked, the stones beneath it stained with grease and ash, a residue no rain could cleanse. Rome, which had crucified rebels and fed Christians to lions, had never seen a death like this. No cries, no curses, just a joke, burned into memory like scripture, and that terrified them more than any uprising ever could, because Lawrence did not resist Rome's cruelty. He consumed it, and in doing so, exposed it for what it was. Not power, but fear dressed as law. They buried him quickly, quietly. The emperor had what he wanted, a spectacle, but not the result. Instead of submission, he planted myth. Instead of warning, he lit a spark. The church, broken and scattered, whispered his name through catacombs and cathedrals. They called him saint before the ashes cooled. His relics were hidden like treasure. His story passed from mouth to mouth, not in sorrow, but in strange burning triumph. Years later, they built a basilica over the bones they could gather. The place where he died became sacred, not cursed, and the iron that had scorched his flesh became a symbol holier than any sword. He was named patron of the poor, protector of cooks, defender of fire's victims, because only he had tamed it. Rome tried to erase him with heat, but they had only made his soul visible. When cruelty attempts to write the ending but the body answers with laughter, who really authors the story? He should have vanished. The fire should have erased him. The smoke should have carried away his story piece by piece until nothing remained but bone dust and forgotten pain. But it didn't, because some deaths refuse to die. Some moments, scorched into the skin of history, pulse louder than any drumbeat of empire. Lawrence did not lead armies. He held no crown. He wrote no books. And yet, he became immortal. Because in the face of one of the slowest, most excruciating deaths Rome could devise, he smiled. His joke, "Turn me over," echoed louder than the screams they expected. That moment turned fire into irony, torture into testimony. It was not gallows humor. It was theological rebellion, a soul so anchored in something eternal that it could turn agony into art. Rome had wanted obedience. Instead, they received a parable, raw, blistered, unforgettable. The iron grate did not silence him, it amplified him. For centuries after his name became legend, his feast day, August 10th, was marked not with mourning, but with reverence. Griddles and fires became holy symbols. His basilica in Rome stands to this day, its stones whispering the truth that brutality can never bury, that a body broken in faith becomes more powerful than any empire's sword. And the man who had nothing, no rank, no army, no wealth, became the patron saint of cooks, comedians, and the poor, as if heaven itself had decided that those who suffer silently deserve a protector, who once joked from the flames. But Lawrence's legacy is not just for saints, It is for all who have suffered at the hands of those more powerful, all who have endured injustice too absurd to scream at. His death asks us, what do we do when cruelty expects us to shatter? Do we break? Or do we, like Lawrence, grin through the smoke and remind the world that even fire cannot consume the soul? He turned a tool of execution into a relic, a slow death into a fast legend. He met the full force of an empire's fury and gave them back a line, a smile, a stillness deeper than fear. Because when death is inevitable, the only power left is how you meet it. And Lawrence chose to meet it not with rage nor with resignation, but with a sentence so holy it could only have been forged in fire,